Dr. Ethan Hayes leaned against the railing of his elevated research outpost, the alien forest stretching before him like an endless ocean of light. The trees here didn't just grow. They pulsed, their bioluminescent tendrils reaching into the darkness with hues of cerulean, amethyst, and emerald. Each color seemed alive, shifting as if whispering secrets to the night. The stillness was deceptive. This wilderness, though stunning, was known for its lethality. Yet Ethan found solace in the solitude, far from the clamor of humanity. A distant sound broke his reverie, low and haunting, like the first note of a forgotten melody. He frowned, turning his gaze toward the horizon. The forests of Eros 9 were not silent, but this sound, this song, was unlike any nocturnal chorus he had heard in his years here. It was faint, almost imperceptible, yet it tugged at him, stirring something deep and primal. Abandoning his post, Ethan grabbed a portable scanner and set out into the undergrowth. The forest enveloped him immediately, the luminous flora casting eerie shadows that danced with his movements. He adjusted the scanner, the faint hum of its operation oddly reassuring amidst the alien ambience. The melody persisted, guiding him deeper into the wild. After an hour of navigating dense vegetation and unsettling silence, he found her. The figure lay crumpled among the roots of a massive, glowing tree, whose canopy shimmered like a living constellation. At first glance, she seemed a part of the forest, her opalescent skin reflecting its colors, her form delicate yet otherworldly. But the uneven rise and fall of her chest betrayed her as alive, though barely. Ethan's breath caught. He had read about the Lyricans in passing, a reclusive species rarely seen outside their homeworld. Their beauty was the stuff of legends, their voices said to evoke emotions so profound they bordered on the supernatural. Yet none of the accounts had prepared him for this. Her shimmering skin, now dulled, bore faint patterns that pulsed weakly, as though struggling to stay alight. Her face, framed by tendrils of silken hair, was contorted in pain. His training kicked in. Kneeling beside her, Ethan scanned her with practiced precision. Her vitals were erratic, her body temperature far lower than expected for a sentient being. He noted unfamiliar toxins in her bloodstream, compounds his scanner struggled to identify. Poison? He cursed under his breath. Whatever had done this to her was sophisticated and deliberate. The faint melody that had guided him here faded as he worked, replaced by a labored silence. He hesitated. The Lyricans were known to be mistrustful of humans, and for good reason. Yet leaving her here was unthinkable. With care, he lifted her fragile form. She was impossibly light, as if made of the very light that surrounded them. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and for a brief moment, a single, faint note escaped her lips, a sound so mournful it sent shivers down his spine. "I've got you," he murmured, more to himself than to her, as he made his way back to the outpost. The sterile lighting of the outpost clashed harshly with the ethereal aura she brought with her. Ethan placed her gently on the examination table, his movements deliberate and measured. He surrounded himself with tools and instruments, his mind racing through possibilities. Her biology was a puzzle, familiar enough to offer a starting point, alien enough to make him question every move. As he worked, he noticed the faint, rhythmic pulsations of her skin begin to sync with the artificial lighting. It was mesmerizing, but it also made him acutely aware of how little he understood. The toxins were attacking her neural pathways, yet her body seemed to be fighting back in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. It was as though her very being resisted his intervention, like a song struggling to stay in tune against discordant forces. Hours passed in a blur of calculations and adjustments. When the crisis finally abated, Ethan slumped into a chair, exhausted but relieved. Her breathing had steadied, her vitals stabilized, yet questions loomed heavy and unrelenting. Who was she? What had brought her to this remote corner of the galaxy? And what manner of danger trailed her footsteps? Ethan glanced at the monitors, where faint readings danced like whispers of a larger story. The room was quiet now, save for the soft hum of the equipment. Outside, the The forest pulsed with its ceaseless light, a universe of mysteries pressing against the thin walls of his sanctuary, and in the center of it all lay the Lyrican, her presence as enigmatic as the melody that had led him to her. Ethan's gaze lingered on her, the weight of her survival settling on his shoulders. He had brought her back from the brink, but the feeling that something larger, something unseen, had begun with this encounter gnawed at him. The night stretched on, filled with questions he dared not voice, and an unease he couldn't shake. Somewhere beyond the glow of the forest, in the vastness of the cosmos, forces were moving. And Ethan Hayes, reclusive xenobiologist, had just been drawn into their orbit. The forest was no longer just a haven of light and quiet mystery. It had shifted, imperceptibly but undeniably, into something more oppressive. Ethan sat by the small medical bay within his outpost, his hands absently running over the keys of his terminal, as the Lyrican woman rested under a faint glow of bioluminescent light he had carefully adjusted to mimic her natural environment. Her shallow breaths echoed faintly in the sterile room, each one a reminder of how tenuous her survival was. He'd done what he could for her. The toxins in her system had begun to subside, though their lingering effects continued to gnaw at her strength. Ethan's scanner still couldn't classify the compounds fully. It was advanced, alien, and cruelly designed. Whoever had done this hadn't intended for her to live. His stomach twisted at the thought, and yet she was alive, barely, lying there like a fragment of starlight brought down to earth. The first rays of an alien dawn crept over the horizon, painting the distant canopy in streaks of deep violet and crimson. Ethan's gaze shifted between her and the monitors. Her vitals were erratic, and every instinct told him there was more to her condition than he understood. For hours, he'd tried to analyze the unique biochemistry of her body. It wasn't just different, it was deliberately complex, as though her kind had evolved in tandem with the luminous, harmonic energy of this planet. It fascinated and terrified him in equal measure. His tools were barely adequate for treating something this extraordinary. He hadn't slept. The coffee cup on his desk sat untouched and cold, its bitter aroma mixing with the sterile tang of antiseptic. When the sound came, it was soft at first, a faint whisper of melody, like the haunting echo of the song he'd heard the night before. His eyes snapped to her. Her lips parted, trembling as though some unseen force pushed at the edges of her consciousness. "Easy," he said, his voice low and uncertain. He leaned forward, unsure if she could even hear him. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing irises that shimmered faintly with the opalescence of her skin. Her gaze fixed on him for a heartbeat, sharp and searching, before closing again. Then she spoke. It wasn't words at first, not entirely. Her voice came in waves of sound, layered with harmonics that made his chest tighten and his thoughts swim. It was language, but one interwoven with emotion so raw it felt like a physical touch. Ethan had to steady himself against the edge of the table, blinking rapidly to clear his head. "I hear you," she murmured, the words resolving into more familiar tones, though her accent carried a strange melodic cadence. Her hand twitched weakly. "Where?" "You're safe," Ethan replied quickly, his voice steadier than he felt. "You're at my research station. I found you in the forest. You were—" He hesitated. "You were poisoned, but you're stable now." Her expression tightened, and a flicker of pain passed over her features. Poisoned. Yes, they did not stop. Her eyes opened again, and this time they bore into his with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "You should not have brought me here." Ethan frowned. "I couldn't just leave you. Whoever did this to you—" "They will come," she interrupted, her voice sharp despite its fragility. "You do not understand what you have done." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "Who are you talking about?" "Hunters." The word was a blade, slicing through the quiet. She struggled to sit up, her body trembling with the effort. Ethan moved to stop her, but the look she gave him froze him in place. "They will find me," And you. Then tell me what I'm dealing with, he pressed, his voice firmer now. Who are these hunters? Why are they after you? She hesitated, her gaze flickering between him and the door, as though calculating whether she could make it out on her own. Then, finally, she relented. I am Ariel, she said. The name lingered in the air like an unresolved chord. And I am a prize. Ethan's brow furrowed. A prize? For what? My voice. My kind. Her hand drifted to her throat, and for a moment a flicker of anguish crossed her face. We are hunted, taken, our songs, stolen. His mind reeled at the implications. He'd heard rumors of species exploited for their unique traits. But this was something else entirely. You're saying they're hunting you for your voice? To, what, sell it? Her nod was almost imperceptible. To control it. To use it. She shuddered, and her voice grew softer. You should have left me. I couldn't. His reply was immediate, almost defensive. That's not who I am. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then you have placed yourself in their path, and they will come. As if on cue, a faint vibration passed through the room, a tremor so subtle Ethan thought he'd imagined it until Ariel's head snapped toward the window. Her face paled, and her shimmering skin dimmed further. What is it? Ethan asked, his heart pounding. They are near. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the fear in it was unmistakable. Ethan rose, his mind racing. The scanners. He needed to check the perimeter scanners. Leaving her for a moment, he rushed to the console in the adjacent room. His fingers flew over the keys, pulling up the feed from the outpost's external sensors. A blip. Faint, but there. A ship, barely detectable against the forest's electromagnetic interference, hovering just beyond the horizon. His throat tightened. They weren't alone anymore. He turned back to the medical bay, where Ariel sat upright now, her fragile frame taut with tension. They're here, he said, and the words felt heavier than they should have. She nodded, her expression grim. Then we must go. Go? Where? He asked, incredulous. This outpost is the only shelter for miles. It is also a beacon. Her voice carried an edge of urgency. If we stay, they will find us, and they will not spare you. Ethan hesitated, his mind a storm of calculations and doubts. The forest outside was as dangerous as the hunters pursuing them, and Ariel was in no condition to travel, yet the conviction in her eyes left little room for argument. All right, he said finally, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. But if we're going to do this, we're doing it my way. I know this terrain better than anyone. Ariel's lips curved into something that might have been a smile, though it was tinged with sadness. Then lead the way, Doctor, Hayes, and pray that your knowledge is enough. The tension in the air was electric as they began to gather supplies. The forest waited, its luminous depths offering both refuge and peril, and somewhere beyond its shimmering expanse, the hunters closed in. The shimmering forest of Eros 9, once a sanctuary for Ethan Hayes, had transformed into a crucible of impending danger. The faint hum of his perimeter sensors still reverberated in his mind, a constant reminder that they were no longer alone. The hunters had arrived. In the dim light of the medical bay, Ariel's fragile form seemed even more ethereal. Her opalescent skin dimmed further with each passing moment, as if the very life was being drained from her. She sat upright now, her posture tense but composed, her luminous eyes locked on Ethan as he secured his equipment. We don't have much time, she said, her voice carrying a gravity that belied her weakened state. They will be swift. Ethan stuffed the last of his essential supplies into a compact field pack. He'd worked in remote environments for years, navigating treacherous terrains and unpredictable wildlife. But this, fleeing from an unknown enemy with an injured alien whose biology he barely understood, was beyond anything he'd prepared for. Yet there was no hesitation in his movements. Ariel's conviction had left no room for doubt. "You'll need this," he said, handing her a small, lightweight breathing apparatus. "The forest gets dense deeper in, and some areas are oxygen poor." She nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she accepted the device. "I can manage," she murmured, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Your forest, it's alive in ways you do not yet understand." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, glancing toward the window where the forest's bioluminescent canopy pulsed faintly, as if in tune with some distant rhythm. "Your scanners cannot see it, but the forest, it feels them, the hunters. It reacts." He followed her gaze, unease settling in his chest. He'd always been aware of the forest's peculiarities, but this was something else. "We'll have to move quickly," he said, shaking off the growing sense of dread. "Can you walk?" Ariel rose slowly, her movements deliberate and strained. "I will keep pace," she said, her voice firm despite her condition. Ethan slung the field pack over his shoulder and gestured toward the door. "Stay close. We're heading north. There's a network of caves about 2 kilometers from here. If we can reach them, we might be able to hold out or find a way to lose them." As they stepped outside, the forest greeted them with its eerie beauty. The bioluminescent flora cast shifting patterns of light and shadow, and the air was thick with the hum of unseen creatures. Ethan led the way, his scanner in hand, its faint glow illuminating the path ahead. They'd been moving for nearly an hour when the first sign of pursuit came. A distant mechanical whine cut through the forest's natural symphony, growing louder with each passing second. Ethan's heart raced. He turned to Ariel, who had stopped in her tracks, her head tilted slightly as if listening to something he couldn't hear. "They're splitting up," she said, her voice barely audible. "One group is circling to intercept us." Ethan's grip on the scanner tightened. "How do you know that?" She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "I can feel their movements. Their intent." There was no time to question her further. The scanner's display flickered, confirming what she'd said. Multiple signatures were converging on their location. "This way," Ethan said, veering off the planned route. The forest grew denser, the glowing vegetation closing in around them. He could feel the air growing thinner, the temperature dropping as they descended into a narrow ravine. It wasn't the most direct path to the caves, but it might buy them time. The sound of pursuit grew louder, accompanied now by flashes of light that pierced the canopy. Ethan's mind raced, calculating their odds of escape. The hunters were faster, better equipped, and clearly familiar with the terrain, but they didn't have Ariel's insights. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to a cluster of trees whose roots formed a natural archway. "Through there." Ethan hesitated. The path she indicated was barely visible, shrouded in thick vines and glowing moss, but the urgency in her voice left no room for argument. He pushed through the dense foliage, feeling the strange, almost electric texture of the plants against his skin. Ariel followed close behind, her breathing labored but steady. They emerged into a small clearing, the air strangely still. The ground beneath their feet was soft, covered in a thick layer of luminescent moss that seemed to pulse faintly in time with their footsteps. Ethan's scanner went dark, its display flickering uselessly. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice hushed. Ariel didn't answer immediately. She knelt down, placing a hand on the moss. Her expression softened, a flicker of relief crossing her face. "It is a sanctuary," she said finally. "The forest. It protects its own." Before Ethan could respond, a sudden sharp sound split the air, a high-pitched whine that made his ears ring. He turned, scanning the clearing's perimeter, but there was no sign of movement. "They are close," Ariel said, rising to her feet. Her calm demeanor was gone, replaced by an edge of urgency. "This sanctuary will not hide us for long." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. They couldn't stay here, but the hunters were too close to outrun. He glanced at Ariel, her luminous presence dimmed but not extinguished, and made a decision. "There's a ridge about half a kilometer from here," he said. "If we can reach it, we'll have the high ground. It's risky, but it might give us an advantage." Ariel hesitated, then nodded. "Lead the way." They moved quickly, the sanctuary's strange calm giving way to the forest's chaotic energy. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, closer, and Ethan could feel the hunters closing in. His every step was deliberate, calculated, but the weight of their situation pressed heavily on him. As they reached the base of the ridge, a sudden burst of light illuminated the forest behind them. Ethan turned, his heart pounding as figures emerged from the shadows. Clad in sleek, dark armor, the hunters moved with an unnatural grace, their weapons gleaming under the forest's bioluminescent glow. "Go!" he shouted, pushing Ariel forward. She stumbled but kept moving, her determination clear despite her exhaustion. Ethan followed, his mind racing for a plan. The ridge loomed ahead, its jagged outline barely visible against the dim light of the alien dawn. The hunters closed in, their movement swift and relentless. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as he and Ariel scrambled up the uneven terrain. The ridge offered little cover, but it was their only chance. As they reached the summit, Ethan turned to face their pursuers, his breath ragged. Ariel stood beside him, her luminous eyes fixed on the advancing figures. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. And then, from deep within her, a sound emerged. It was not a cry of fear or despair, but a note, pure, resonant, and powerful. The air around them seemed to ripple as the note grew, carrying with it a force that Ethan couldn't comprehend, but felt in every fiber of his being. The hunters faltered, their movement slowing as if caught in an invisible web. Ariel's voice rose, weaving a melody that was both haunting and defiant. The forest responded, its luminous canopy pulsing in harmony with her song. Ethan watched, awestruck, as the hunters' pursuit faltered. Their sleek forms, once so menacing, seemed to waver as though the very essence of their determination was being unraveled. The melody Ariel sang was no mere sound. It was a force, a living, breathing manifestation of something ancient and unfathomable. It resonated with the forest, the glowing trees trembling as if in recognition of her defiance. Ethan's breath caught as the hunters hesitated, their weapons lowering incrementally. For the briefest moment, he allowed himself to hope they might retreat, overwhelmed by whatever power Ariel was unleashing. But then, one of them, a taller figure clad in armor edged with faint red light, stepped forward. The figure raised an arm, a sleek device at their wrist emitting a sharp counter-frequency. The melody faltered, Ariel stumbling as though struck by an unseen blow. Ethan darted forward, catching her before she fell completely. Her body trembled in his arms, and the opalescent shimmer of her skin flickered weakly. "They're adapting," she murmured, her voice faint. "They always do." Ethan's jaw tightened. The hunters advanced again, their movements more deliberate now, the counter-frequency growing louder. Whatever advantage Ariel had gained was slipping away, and they were out of options. "Stay with me," he said, gripping her arm as he scanned the ridge. The jagged terrain offered little in the way of hiding places, but his eyes settled on a narrow crevice, partially hidden by a cluster of glowing ferns. It wasn't much, but it was their best shot. "This way," he urged, guiding her toward the crevice. Ariel stumbled but followed, her breaths shallow and labored. The hunters were close now, their voices sharp and clipped as they coordinated. Ethan forced himself to focus on the terrain, pulling Ariel into the narrow opening and pressing them both against the cool rock face. The hunters arrived at the summit moments later, their dark forms silhouetted against the bioluminescent glow of the forest below. Ethan held his breath, his heart hammering in his chest. Beside him, Ariel was motionless, her gaze fixed on the faint light spilling through the crevice's opening. One of the hunters stepped forward, scanning the area with a device that emitted a faint, pulsating light. It swept over the ridge, the crevice's edge glowing faintly as the beam passed over it. Ethan tensed, his hand moving instinctively to the small, compact blade strapped to his belt. It was a futile gesture. Against their armor and weapons, it might as well have been a twig, but the weight of it in his hand steadied him. The beam paused, lingering on the crevice for a heartbeat too long. Ethan's grip tightened, his mind racing through potential scenarios, none of them ending well. But then, the hunter turned away, the beam sweeping elsewhere. Ethan exhaled silently, relief flooding his veins. But the reprieve was short-lived. From deeper within the forest, a new sound emerged, a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down his spine. The hunters froze, their movement suddenly cautious as they turned toward the sound. "What now?" Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. Ariel's eyes closed briefly, a flicker of understanding crossing her face. "The forest," she said, her voice faint but resolute. "It has awakened." The ground beneath them trembled, the moss and ferns around the ridge pulsing with an almost aggressive light. The growl grew louder, joined by the rustling of leaves and the snapping of branches. Ethan's pulse quickened. He had seen the forest's defenses before, vines ensnaring intruders, spores disorienting them. But this felt different. This felt personal. The hunters regrouped, their stances defensive now as they scanned the surrounding forest. A sudden burst of motion to their left drew their fire, bright energy bolts illuminating the darkness. But their weapons found no target. The forest itself seemed to shift and move, its glowing flora twisting unnaturally as though alive. Ethan turned to Ariel, his voice urgent. "What's happening? Is it helping us?" Her eyes met his, filled with a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "It's not helping you. It's protecting its own." Before he could respond, the ridge beneath them shook violently, a deep fissure splitting the rock. Ethan grabbed Ariel, pulling her back as the ground crumbled where they'd been standing. Below, the hunters were in disarray, their formations breaking as the forest's assault intensified. Vines lashed out, their bioluminescent tendrils wrapping around limbs and weapons, dragging some hunters into the undergrowth. Ethan's mind raced. This was their chance. "We have to move," he said, helping Ariel to her feet. "While they're distracted." She nodded weakly, leaning heavily on him as they descended the ridge. The path was treacherous, the ground unstable and slick with glowing moss. Behind them, the sounds of the hunters' struggle faded into the distance, replaced by the forest's haunting symphony. They reached the base of the ridge, just as the first light of dawn broke through the canopy. Ethan glanced back, his chest tight with a mix of relief and dread. The hunters were still out there, and whatever force the forest had unleashed wouldn't hold them off forever. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice firm. "There's a safer route further north." "No," Ariel interrupted, her voice stronger now. She straightened, her opalescent shimmer returning faintly. "We can't run forever. I need to finish this." Ethan stared at her, his mind reeling. "Finish what? What are you talking about?" She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a steely resolve. "They will not stop until I am theirs, unless I stop them first." The weight of her words settled heavily between them. Ethan shook his head. "You're not strong enough. And even if you were, what are you going to do against that?" He gestured toward the ridge, where the last echoes of the hunter's struggle still lingered. Ariel placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but firm. "This is not your fight, Ethan. You've done more than anyone could have asked. But if you stay with me, you must understand. It will not end until one of us falls." Ethan's jaw tightened. The logical part of his mind screamed at him to walk away, to leave her to whatever fate awaited her and return to the safety of his outpost. But the thought of abandoning her, of letting the hunters win, was unbearable. "Then we make our stand together," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his resolve. Ariel's expression softened, a flicker of gratitude crossing her face. "Then we must be ready. The forest has given us time, but it will not give us victory." As they disappeared into the dense undergrowth, the forest around them pulsed with a quiet intensity, as if acknowledging their resolve. The hunters would come again, and when they did, Ethan and Ariel would be waiting. The first light of Eros 9's twin suns spilled across the horizon, bathing the forest in a spectral glow that seemed almost celebratory, as if the planet itself acknowledged the culmination of a long, grueling battle. Ethan Hayes leaned against the trunk of a massive bioluminescent tree, its light pulsing faintly, in rhythm with his own labored breathing. Beside him, Ariel stood silently, her opalescent skin shimmering faintly in the morning light, a stark contrast to the blood and ash that stained the ground beneath them. The hunters were gone. Ethan replayed the events of the past few hours in his mind, the desperate ascent to the ridge, Ariel's haunting melody that had held their pursuers at bay, and the forest's sudden feral intervention. It had not merely resisted the invaders, it had consumed them. Tendrils of light and shadow had erupted from the ground, ensnaring the hunters in a merciless embrace. Their weapons, once so devastating, had been rendered useless, their cries drowned out by the forest's relentless symphony. The hunters had underestimated the power of this world, and now they were no more. "You were right," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. "The forest, it protects its own." Ariel turned to him, her luminous eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "It does," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "But it does not forgive." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the charred remains of the ridge. The forest had taken its toll not only on the hunters, but also on itself. Entire swathes of glowing flora lay blackened and lifeless, their light extinguished in the chaos. And yet, in the midst of this destruction, new growth was already emerging, small, fragile tendrils of green pushing through the ash. "What happens now?" he asked, breaking the silence. Ariel hesitated, her expression unreadable. "Now," she said, "you must decide." Ethan frowned. "Decide what?" She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "You have seen what this world is capable of, its beauty, its power, its resilience, but also its cost." She gestured to the devastation around them. "The hunters will not be the last to come. Others will follow, drawn by the same greed, the same hunger for what they cannot understand. If you stay, you will be part of this cycle. If you leave, you might escape it." Ethan stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. The galaxy was vast, and the allure of Eros 9's secrets would not fade simply because one group of hunters had been defeated. The planet would remain a beacon for those who sought to exploit it, and the battle they had just fought would be only the beginning. "And you?" he asked. "What will you do?" Ariel's gaze softened, a faint smile touching her lips. "I belong to this world," she said simply. "It is my home, my sanctuary. I will stay and protect it, as I always have." Ethan's chest tightened. He had known Ariel for only a short time, yet their bond felt deeper than anything he had experienced before. The thought of leaving her, of abandoning this world, and all it had come to mean, was almost unbearable. But he also knew the risks of staying. He was an outsider here, a visitor in a place that was not his own. "You could come with me," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Ariel's smile widened, but there was sadness in her eyes. "I cannot leave," she said. "This is where I am needed. This is where I belong." Ethan looked away, his hands clenching into fists. He had fought so hard to keep her safe, to protect this fragile, luminous being who had become so much more than a stranger. And now, he was faced with a choice he wasn't ready to make. He began, but his voice faltered. The words seemed inadequate, no matter how he tried to shape them. Ariel reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was light, almost imperceptible, but it grounded him. "Whatever you choose," she said, "I will not forget what you have done." "You have given me hope, Ethan, and that is a gift I will carry with me always." The suns rose higher, their light growing warmer, illuminating the path ahead. Ethan took a deep breath, the air tinged with the earthy scent of the forest's renewal. He knew what he had to do, even if it tore at his heart. "I'll stay," he said finally, his voice steady. "For as long as I'm needed." Ariel's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Are you certain?" He nodded. "I can't walk away from this. From you. If there's a chance to make a difference, to protect this place, I'll take it." For a moment neither of them spoke, then Ariel stepped closer, her expression softening. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan smiled, though his heart still ached with the weight of his decision. Let's make it count. Together, they turned toward the forest, its luminous canopy glowing brighter as if welcoming them back. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and challenges they could not yet foresee. But for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt a sense of purpose. He had found something worth fighting for, and someone worth standing beside. And as they walked into the heart of Eros 9, the suns at their backs, the forest seemed to hum with quiet approval, its ancient song carrying a promise of resilience, of hope, and of the enduring bond between its protectors and its people. The silence of deep space was absolute, save for the faint hum of a starship's life support systems. For David Mercer, it had always been a comforting sound, a steady reminder that, no matter how far he traveled from Earth, the machinery of human ingenuity surrounded him like a protective cocoon. But that cocoon was unraveling. The hum turned to a sputter, then a shrill, grating alarm that pierced the stillness of his small vessel. Panels flickered, throwing the cramped cockpit into a chaotic strobe of red and white. His pulse quickened as a synthesized voice, calm to the point of cruelty, announced the obvious. "Warning, critical systems failure. Hull integrity compromised. Prepare for impact." "Prepare for impact? What the hell does that even mean?" David muttered, his voice cracking as he yanked on the unresponsive controls. The ship's nose dipped violently, throwing him against his restraints. Through the viewport, he caught glimpses of the planet below, a swirling mass of green and gold clouds, obscuring whatever fate awaited him on the surface. Gravity's grip was relentless, pulling him faster and faster toward the unknown world. A final, deafening crack echoed through the cabin as the ship's stabilizers gave way. David braced himself, eyes wide, heart pounding, as the planet's surface rose to meet him. The crash was not a clean one. David woke to the acrid scent of burnt circuitry, and the disorienting angle of his cockpit, now canted sharply to one side. His body ached with the dull throb of bruises, but he was alive. A small miracle given the state of his vessel. Sparks spat from torn cables, and the viewport was webbed with fractures, distorting his view of the alien landscape beyond. For a long moment, he sat motionless, letting his breath slow and his mind catch up. Then the weight of his situation pressed down like a physical force. He was stranded, light years from home, his ship barely a crumpled tin can, and no guarantee of rescue. The first thing that struck him as he stumbled out of the wreckage was the light. The planet's twin suns hung low on the horizon, their combined glow casting the jungle in hues of amber and jade. The air was thick, almost tangible, alive with a faint luminescence that clung to the trees and the ground like mist. Every leaf and branch seemed to pulse faintly, as though the forest itself was breathing. David glanced back at his ship, half buried in the soft, mossy terrain. Smoke rose in lazy tendrils, dissipating quickly into the dense atmosphere. He muttered a string of curses under his breath, his mind already cataloging the repairs he would need to make, if he could make them at all. He didn't hear the figures approach. The first sign of life came as a whisper on the wind, a melodic hum that seemed to vibrate in his chest. He froze, every nerve on edge. Slowly he turned, scanning the tree line. At first, he saw nothing but shifting shadows and the strange play of light. Then they emerged. Tall, slender figures stepped gracefully from the underbrush, their movements so fluid they seemed almost part of the landscape. Their skin shimmered with an iridescent sheen, reflecting the amber light in hues of silver and gold. Their eyes, large and luminous, locked onto him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. David's translator chip struggled to process the sounds they made. a series of musical tones, rising and falling like a song. He raised his hands, palms open, in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. I come in peace?" he ventured, his voice shaky. The figures exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. One of them stepped forward. She was taller than the rest, her bearing regal, almost commanding. Her features were sharp, yet elegant, her metallic-hued skin marked with intricate patterns that glowed faintly as she moved. When she spoke, her voice was rich and melodic, though the words remained incomprehensible. David's translator finally caught up, rendering her speech in a flat, mechanical tone. "You are not of this place." "No," he admitted, lowering his hands slowly. "I crash-landed. My ship, it's damaged. I mean no harm." The leader tilted her head, studying him with an unnerving intensity. Behind her, the others began to hum softly, a sound that seemed to resonate in the air around them. David couldn't tell if it was a form of communication or something else entirely. "You have arrived at a significant time," she said, her tone cryptic. "Your presence here, it will be of great importance." David blinked, struggling to keep up. "Significant time? Importance? What are you talking about?" She didn't answer. Instead, she gestured for him to follow. The village was unlike anything David had ever seen. Nestled high in the canopy, it was a network of interconnected platforms and structures, their surfaces glowing faintly in the dim light. Bioluminescent plants grew in abundance, casting the entire scene in a surreal, dreamlike glow. As he walked, David couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The Xyrathans moved silently around him, their expressions unreadable, their eyes always lingering just a moment too long. His unease grew when he noticed the patterns in their behavior, the way they subtly positioned themselves around him, the occasional glances exchanged between them. It wasn't hostile exactly, but it wasn't welcoming either. "What is this place?" he asked, breaking the heavy silence. The leader, who had introduced herself as Lysera, paused. "This is our home," she said simply. "That's not what I meant," David pressed. "Why are you helping me? What do you want from me?" Lysera's gaze met his, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of emotion, something between curiosity and sorrow. "You are an outsider," she said, "and outsiders are rare." Before he could ask what she meant, another figure appeared, a younger Xyrathan with a fiery presence that was immediately striking. She had the same shimmering skin and glowing eyes, but her movements were sharper, more purposeful. She stared at David, her lips curving into a faint, almost predatory smile. "Welcome to the season," she said, her voice carrying a teasing edge. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into, human." David's heart sank. The weight of her words, paired with the knowing glances of the others, sent a chill through him. He was beginning to understand that whatever had drawn him to this planet, it was no mere accident. Questions swirled in his mind, each more unsettling than the last. Why had Lysera called his arrival significant? What was this season they spoke of? And most troubling of all, what role did they expect him to play in it? For now, the answers remained shrouded in mystery, and David could only follow where the path led, deeper into the heart of the Xyrathan's strange and enigmatic world. The village hummed with life as the evening deepened. The Xyrathans moved like shadows, their glowing patterns shifting in the dim light, a constant reminder of their otherworldly nature. David sat cross-legged on a platform of woven roots, trying to gather his thoughts. The translator's mechanical monotone replayed Lysera's words in his mind. "Your presence here, it will be of great importance." The phrase looped endlessly, gnawing at him. He wasn't sure what was more unsettling, the cryptic nature of her statement or the calm certainty in her voice when she'd said it. He looked down at his hands, smeared with dirt from earlier attempts to salvage parts from his ruined ship. His fingers trembled, though he couldn't tell if it was from exhaustion or the weight of an unspoken truth pressing down on him. He wasn't just stranded. He was caught in something bigger, something he didn't understand. Lysera approached as the twin moons rose, their pale light casting a silvery glow over the village. Her steps were silent, but David had learned to sense her presence by the faint warmth that seemed to radiate from her. She stopped a few feet away, studying him in that quiet, unnerving way she had. "You haven't eaten," she said, gesturing to a bowl of unfamiliar fruit placed beside him. David forced a tired smile. "Wasn't sure what's edible, and what might kill me." She knelt gracefully, taking one of the fruits and biting into it with ease. The juice glistened on her lips as she held it out to him. "Safe," she assured him. He hesitated, then took a cautious bite. The flavor was intense, a mix of sweetness and a faint metallic tang that lingered on his tongue. It was oddly satisfying, though it did little to settle his nerves. "Why am I here?" he asked suddenly, the question spilling out before he could stop it. "Why are you helping me?" Lysera's expression remained calm, but her luminous eyes darkened slightly. "It is difficult to explain," she said, her voice measured. "You arrived during the season, a time of renewal and necessity for my people. Outsiders are rare, and when they come, it is never by chance." David frowned. "You think I was brought here?" She didn't answer directly, instead turning her gaze to the jungle beyond the village. The trees swayed in a breeze he couldn't feel, their glowing leaves creating a shifting tapestry of light and shadow. "Our people face challenges," she said at last, "ones that require outside solutions." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp, melodic call. Lysera stood instantly, her body tense. David followed her gaze to see Maraith striding toward them, her movements quick and precise. The younger Zirathan's expression was fierce, her glowing patterns flickering like a flame. "There's been movement on the eastern border," Maraith announced, her voice low but urgent. Lysera's calm demeanor hardened. "How many?" "5, maybe 6. Scouts, most likely." Maraith's eyes flicked to David, her lips curving into a smirk. "Could be they've caught wind of our guest." David's stomach churned. "Scouts? What scouts?" Lysera's gaze remained on Maraith. "Ensure the patrols are reinforced. No unnecessary risks." Maraith nodded, her expression serious. "I'll see to it." As she turned to leave, she paused, her smirk returning. "Might want to keep the human close, Lysera. Not everyone would ask permission to take him." David's pulse quickened as the implication sank in. "Take me? What does she mean by that?" Lysera sighed, her shoulders heavy with an unspoken burden. "Our people are not the only ones struggling to survive," she admitted. "Other tribes, they are less bound by tradition. To them, you would be a prize, a resource to be claimed." "A resource?" David repeated, his voice rising. "You're talking about me like I'm some kind of commodity." Lysera met his gaze, her expression softening. "I understand your anger, David, but you must also understand our desperation. The balance between survival and morality is fragile." The following days were a blur of tension and uneasy alliances. Lysera tasked David with aiding the villagers in small ways, repairing tools, assisting with their intricate water filtration systems, anything to make him useful. Yet even as he worked, the weight of his situation loomed large. Maraith's words haunted him, as did the glances he received from other Zirathans. Some were curious, others wary, but a few were openly possessive, their gazes lingering a beat too long. He couldn't tell if it was fascination or something more primal, but it made his skin crawl. On the third night, his unease reached a breaking point. He was working on a makeshift solar panel salvaged from his ship when he felt a presence behind him. Turning, he saw Maraith leaning casually against a nearby tree, her smirk firmly in place. "You work hard?" she said, her tone light, but with an edge that set him on guard. "Trying to earn your keep, human?" "Trying to get out of here," he replied tersely, turning back to his work. Maraith chuckled, a low, melodic sound. "You might want to reconsider. Out there," she gestured vaguely toward the jungle. "Your prey. Here, At least you're protected. David set his tools down, glaring at her. Protected from what? You keep talking about dangers, but no one's telling me the whole story. Her smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of something deeper, pity, perhaps, or regret. The whole story would only scare you, she said. And you're scared enough as it is. Before he could respond, the village alarm sounded, a deep resonant tone that vibrated through the air. Maraith's expression darkened instantly. Stay here, she ordered, her voice sharp. But David didn't stay. He followed the villagers to the eastern perimeter, his curiosity outweighing his fear. What he saw sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. A group of Zirathans stood at the edge of the jungle, their weapons drawn. Across from them, half hidden in the shadows, were figures that looked similar but subtly different. Their markings were harsher, their movements more aggressive. Zyelna, Lysira's rival, stood at the forefront, her gaze fixed on David. So, Zyelna said, her voice a dangerous melody, this is the outsider. David's heart raced as every pair of eyes turned to him. For the first time since landing on this planet, he realized just how precarious his position truly was. The jungle air hung heavy with tension. Zelna's gaze was sharp, her glowing eyes reflecting the faint light of the village's bioluminescent perimeter. Behind her, the rival Zirathans shifted, their movements predatory, their expressions poised between curiosity and hostility. David could feel the weight of their stares like a tangible force pressing against his chest. Lysira stood motionless beside him, her presence a calming anchor amidst the turmoil. But even she couldn't mask the subtle shift in her posture, the way her fingers hovered near the intricate blade at her side, the tightness around her jaw. So, Zelna repeated, her voice smooth and cutting, this is the outsider. The one who fell from the stars. David swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. I didn't exactly plan this, he said, his attempt at levity falling flat against the gravity of the moment. Zelna tilted her head, her expression one of mock sympathy. And yet, here you are. A gift dropped into Lysira's lap during the season. She paused, her eyes narrowing. But tell me, human, do you even know what you've stumbled into? What you are? David opened his mouth to respond, but Lysira's hand shot out, gripping his arm. Enough, she said, her voice firm. You will not involve him in your schemes. Zelna smirked, a cold and calculating expression. Oh, Lysira, always so noble, always so naive. You think you can keep him safe? That you can shield him from what's to come? I'll do what's necessary, Lysira replied, her tone like tempered steel. David glanced between them, confusion and frustration bubbling to the surface. Would someone please explain what's going on? Why does it feel like I'm the prize in some game I didn't agree to play? Zelna's laugh was sharp and humorless. Oh, you poor ignorant creature, you're not the prize, you're the key. And keys, she added, her gaze flicking to Lysira. Don't stay unused for long. Before David could press further, Zelna raised a hand, signaling her warriors to retreat. We'll speak again soon, she said, her tone dripping with menace. When the season ends and the balance shifts, we'll see whose choices mattered most. With that, she disappeared into the jungle, leaving an uneasy silence in her wake. Back in the village, Lysira wasted no time. She led David to a secluded chamber, its walls made of woven vines that pulsed faintly with light. Once inside, she turned to face him, her calm facade cracking just enough to reveal the strain beneath. You shouldn't have followed us, she said, her voice low but urgent. I couldn't just sit there, David shot back. Especially not when my name's being tossed around like some cosmic joke. What did she mean I'm the key? What am I supposed to unlock? Lysira hesitated, her luminous eyes studying him intently. It's not that simple, she said at last. The season. It's a time of renewal for our people, a chance to strengthen our bloodlines and secure our future. Outsiders like you are rare, and when they arrive, they bring possibilities. David frowned. Possibilities? You mean like... He stopped, the implication hitting him like a cold wave. Oh no, 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 no. Is this about... reproduction? Lysera's expression softened, though it was tinged with sadness. It is part of it, yes. But it's more than that. Our people are at a crossroads, David. Genetic diversity is dwindling, and the rival tribes grow desperate. Zelna sees you as a tool to be used, a resource to exploit. I do not. Her words hung in the air, a quiet plea for understanding. But David couldn't shake the growing knot of unease in his chest. And what about you? He asked. What do you want from me? Before Lysera could answer, the ground beneath them trembled, a deep, rumbling vibration that sent dust falling from the chamber walls. What now? David muttered, bracing himself as the tremor subsided. Lysera's expression darkened. It's the rift. It's waking. The rift was a jagged canyon that cut through the jungle like a scar, its depths shrouded in darkness. Lysera had spoken of it briefly before, describing it as a place of power and danger, a sacred site that the tribes avoided except during the most desperate times. Now, as David stood at its edge, he understood why. The air around the rift was thick and charged, like the moments before a storm. Strange glowing tendrils of energy rose from the chasm, writhing like living things before dissipating into the sky. What is this place? David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lysera stood beside him, her expression grave. The rift is the heart of our world, she said. It's where our ancestors once drew strength, where the balance of our people was maintained, but it is also where the greatest dangers lie. And you think it's waking up? She nodded. The energy, you see, it hasn't been this active in generations. Something is stirring within the rift, something connected to your arrival. David felt a chill run down his spine. Why does everything have to be connected to me? Lysera turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Because you are not just an outsider, David. You are a catalyst. The rift reacts to those who carry change, those who can tip the balance. And right now the balance is shifting, between the tribes, between survival and extinction. Her words sank in like stones, each one deepening the pit in his stomach. So what do? We must confront it, Lysera said. The rift does not wake without purpose. If we ignore it, the consequences could be catastrophic, for all of us. As they prepared to descend into the chasm, David couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something far larger than himself. The Xyrathans moved with a mixture of reverence and fear, their glowing patterns dimmed, as though the energy of the rift demanded their submission. Lysera led the way, her steps sure and steady, while Maraith brought up the rear, her fiery presence a sharp contrast to the oppressive atmosphere. What's down there? David asked, his voice trembling despite himself. No one knows for certain, Lysera admitted. Legends speak of ancient forces, powerful, uncontrollable, but they also speak of renewal, of a chance to set things right. David clenched his fists, his mind racing. He hadn't signed up for this. He was a researcher, not a hero. But as they descended into the rift, the air growing colder and heavier with each step, he realized there was no turning back. Whatever lay at the bottom of the chasm, it was waiting for him, and it wasn't going to let him leave unchanged. The descent into the rift was unlike anything David had ever experienced. The air grew colder and denser with every step, carrying an electric charge that set his nerves on edge. The glowing tendrils that spiraled upward from the chasm's depths pulsed faintly, their rhythm eerily synchronized with the pounding of his heart. Behind him, Maraith's voice was a quiet murmur, directing the warriors who carried glowing crystal orbs for light. The orbs cast strange shifting patterns across the jagged walls, revealing markings that seemed almost deliberate, symbols carved by hands long gone. Lysera, David whispered, nodding toward the carvings. What do those mean? Lysera paused, her luminous eyes scanning the symbols with a mix of reverence and unease. They are warnings, she said. Messages left by those who came before us, warning of the rift's power and the price of disturbing it. David's chest tightened. And yet we're walking straight into it? Lysira's gaze softened, but her resolve remained unshaken. The rift doesn't wake without reason. If we turn away now, we risk more than we can bear. The balance is already crumbling. David wanted to argue, to demand they leave this cursed place and return to the relative safety of the surface. But as he looked at Lysira's face, calm yet burdened by the weight of responsibility, he couldn't bring himself to speak. The ground leveled out as the group reached a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in darkness. The glowing tendrils of energy were stronger here, weaving through the air like living beings. At the center of the cavern stood a monolithic structure, an altar of sorts, carved from a single slab of black stone. The altar radiated an otherworldly light, a deep, pulsating glow that seemed to draw the group toward it. Lysira stepped forward, her movements cautious but deliberate. David followed reluctantly, his instincts screaming at him to turn back. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the low hum emanating from the altar. Lysira ran her fingers along the surface of the stone, tracing the intricate patterns etched into its surface. "It's a conduit," she said, "a bridge between worlds. Our ancestors believed the rift was a gateway, a place where the barriers between the physical and the spiritual could be crossed." David frowned. "Crossed how? And to what end?" Lysira didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to him, her expression grave. "The energy of the rift reacts to certain beings, those who carry the potential to shift the balance. You are one of those beings, David." His heart sank. "Why does it always come back to me? I didn't ask for this. I didn't want any of this." "No one chooses their role in the rift's design," Lysira said gently. "But the fact remains, your presence here has awakened something dormant. The energy that flows through this place recognizes you as a catalyst. It will not rest until the balance is restored." David took a step back, his mind racing. "Restore the balance? How? What does it want me to do?" Lysira hesitated, and for the first time, David saw uncertainty in her eyes. "That is a question only the rift can answer." As if on cue, the ground beneath the altar began to tremble. The pulsating glow intensified, filling the cavern with an oppressive light. The air grew heavy, and David struggled to breathe as an ethereal voice echoed through the chamber, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The balance must be restored. Sacrifice or renewal, choose." David staggered, clutching his head as the voice reverberated through his mind. "What does that mean? What are you asking me to do?" The voice didn't respond, but the glow of the altar shifted, forming an image in the air above it. David saw the Xyrathan village, its glowing huts surrounded by dense jungle. He saw the rival tribe, their warriors advancing with weapons raised. And he saw himself, standing between the two forces, caught in a storm of chaos and destruction. Lysira placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "The rift is showing you the future," she said, "a future shaped by your choices." David turned to her, desperation in his eyes. "But I don't even understand what's happening. How am I supposed to make a choice when I don't know what the consequences will be?" Lysira's expression was unreadable. "The rift doesn't deal in certainty. It shows possibilities, not guarantees. The choice is yours, David, but you must make it." The voice returned, colder and more insistent. "Sacrifice or renewal. Choose." David felt the weight of the words pressing down on him, suffocating him. He looked at Lysira, then at Miraith, who stood silently nearby, her usual fiery demeanor subdued. He thought of the village, of the people who had shown him kindness, despite their desperation. "What happens if I choose wrong?" he asked, his voice trembling. Lysira shook her head. "There is no wrong choice, only consequences." David closed his eyes, trying to block out the overwhelming pressure of the moment. He thought of Earth, of the life he had left behind. He thought of the Xyrathan's plight, their struggle for survival against impossible odds. And he thought of the rift, its enigmatic energy calling to him, demanding a resolution. When he opened his eyes, his decision was made. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect them," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. "Tell me what I need to do." The altar's glow intensified, and the cavern was filled with a deafening roar as the energy of the rift surged. The tendrils of light wrapped around David, lifting him off the ground and enveloping him in a cocoon of radiant energy. Lysira and Maraith watched in stunned silence as the light pulsed, growing brighter and brighter until it consumed everything. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. David collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The altar was dark, its glow extinguished, and the cavern was eerily silent. Lysira knelt beside him, her expression a mix of relief and awe. "What happened?" she asked. David looked at her, his eyes filled with a new, unsettling clarity. "The rift showed me what I need to do," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not going to be easy." Lysira helped him to his feet, her grip firm and reassuring. "Then we'll face it together," she said. As they began the climb back to the surface, David couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was yet to come. The rift had given him answers, but it had also left him with a terrible burden, a choice that would define not only his future, but the fate of an entire world. The dawn rose slowly over the Zirathan jungle, its pale light filtering through the dense canopy to illuminate the village below. David stood at the edge of the rift, staring down into its now silent depths. The altar had gone dark, its enigmatic energy spent. Yet the weight of its final message lingered, etched into his mind like a brand. Behind him, the village stirred to life, its inhabitants preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The rival tribe was on the move, their scouts already spotted near the perimeter. Despite the calm facade of the morning, tension crackled in the air. David turned, his eyes finding Lysira among the preparations. She stood with Maraith, coordinating the defensive efforts with the steady authority that had become her hallmark. Even from a distance, David could see the strain etched into her features. He descended into the village, his heart heavy but resolute. As he approached, Lysira looked up, her expression softening. "You've been quiet since we returned," she said, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "What did the rift show you?" David hesitated. "It showed me two paths. One leads to destruction, of the village, of the Zirathans, and maybe even of myself. The other—" He trailed off, the enormity of the choice still pressing on him. "The other requires sacrifice, something precious." Lysira's gaze didn't waver. "Then you already know what you have to do." The village gathered at the central clearing, a space that had once been used for rituals and celebrations, but now served as a makeshift war council. The warriors stood in a semicircle, their glowing weapons glinting in the morning light. Elder Zirathans whispered prayers under their breath, their voices a low, melodic hum. David stood before them, feeling the weight of every gaze on him. His human frame seemed small and fragile compared to the towering Zirathans, yet the rift's choice had placed him at the center of their fate. "We don't have much time," he began, his voice steady despite the fear twisting in his gut. "The rival tribe is coming, and they'll stop at nothing to take what they want. But we're not helpless. We have strength, intelligence, and something they don't expect." Lysira stepped forward, her voice carrying the calm authority that had become a beacon for her people. "David has devised a plan, a way to protect our village and ensure our survival. But it will require all of us to work together, to trust one another completely." Maraith crossed her arms, her fiery eyes narrowing. "And what exactly is this plan?" David met her gaze, his resolve firm. "We're going to use the rift." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mix of awe and apprehension. The rift was sacred, its power revered and feared in equal measure. To invoke it was to court danger, but also possibility. "The rift's energy can be harnessed," David continued, his voice rising. "When I touched the altar, it showed me how. We can create a barrier, an impenetrable force field that will protect the village and drive back the rival tribe." But there's a cost. Silence fell over the gathering as the weight of his words sank in. What cost? Maraith asked, her tone wary. David looked around, meeting the eyes of each Xyrathan warrior in turn. The rift's power isn't limitless. To activate the barrier, it requires a source, a life force strong enough to sustain it. The implications were clear, and a collective gasp swept through the crowd. Lysera stepped closer to David, her voice steady but tinged with sorrow. You mean, it requires you? David nodded. The rift chose me for a reason. It recognized something in me, a connection to its energy. If I channel that connection, I can activate the barrier, but I won't survive it. The hours that followed were a blur of activity as the village prepared for the plan's execution. Warriors fortified the perimeter, placing traps and decoys to slow the rival tribe's advance. Elders performed rituals to focus the rift's energy, their chants weaving through the air like threads of an ancient tapestry. David spent the time in quiet reflection, his thoughts a tumult of fear, regret, and a strange sense of peace. He thought of Earth, of the life he had left behind, and the one he had stumbled into. He thought of Lysera, of the bond they had forged despite their differences. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting the jungle in shades of gold and crimson, David found himself at the rift's edge once more. Lysera joined him, her presence a steadying force. You don't have to do this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I do, David replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The rift showed me what happens if I don't. The village falls. You fall. I can't let that happen. Lysera's eyes glistened, but she didn't let the tears fall. You've given us so much already, more than we had any right to ask for. David turned to her, his expression softening. You didn't ask for this. None of you did. But sometimes the only way to move forward is to make the hard choice. The rival tribe arrived at twilight, their warriors spilling into the clearing like a tide of shadow and flame. Their leader, Xyelna, stood at the forefront, her sharp features twisted in a predatory smile. David stood at the altar, the glowing tendrils of the rift's energy coiling around him like living things. Behind him, the Xyrathan warriors formed a defensive line, their weapons gleaming in the fading light. Xyelna raised her hand, signaling her warriors to halt. You think this pitiful display will stop us? She sneered. David stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with authority. Number, but this will. With a deep breath, he placed his hands on the altar. The energy surged, enveloping him in a blinding light. The ground trembled, and a roar like thunder filled the air as the rift's power exploded outward. A barrier of shimmering light erupted around the village, its energy pulsing with an intensity that drove the rival warriors back. Xyelna screamed in fury, but her voice was drowned out by the deafening hum of the barrier. David felt the life draining from him, the rift's energy consuming him piece by piece, but as his vision blurred, he saw Lysera's face, calm, proud, and filled with gratitude. The last thing he heard was her voice, a whisper carried on the wind. Thank you. When the light faded, the rival tribe was gone, their forces scattered. The barrier remained, a shimmering testament to David's sacrifice. Lysera stood at the altar, her hand resting on the cold stone. She closed her eyes, whispering a prayer of thanks for the human who had given everything to save her people. Though David was gone, his legacy would endure, a bridge between two worlds, a reminder of the power of sacrifice and the bonds that transcend species. And as the village began to rebuild, the Xyrathans looked to the future with hope, their path illuminated by the memory of the man who had chosen to protect them, no matter the cost.